I have a lot of thoughts around that because I think the education of qualitative research has to be done better. People have to understand how it works and understand how to do a good job of it. And a lot of people think they just pick it up overnight and they start running with it. And I can do a study. It's no big deal. And it's not. So
You mentioned one of my favorite words earlier, which is qualitative research. And I know that's your bread and butter. I'd love to hear a little bit more about why you love qualitative research.
maybe I'll say why I shouldn't be doing quantitative research is because, wow, I have math challenge, like big time. But I think that qualitative to me has always been fascinating because my way of describing the difference between qualitative and quantitative is in qualitative, you're describing the variety. And in quantitative, you're using volume to describe. Right off the bat, to me, I am not somebody who is quantitative. And the irony is, if somebody knows my personality, I'm very binary in my approach to everything, which should really make me fall into the quantitative side a little bit better. But I love actually living in the abstract when I'm learning about different topics. There's never just one right answer to a question. There is multiple viewpoints, but peeling those viewpoints back and just getting to know you, Jen, why are you the way you are? Like, what formed this opinion? What made you love the heat or not love the heat in the city that you live in? What is it about that? Like, you started by saying, I love the heat, but then you're just like, 104 months is getting a little bit too much. It's those kinds of details that I just love listening to because you have a story and I most definitely want to hear it. So for me, qualitative research has been a wonderful vehicle to be able to get people's eyes lighting up, whether they're telling the story or whether they're consuming the story. It's happy. Because even in situations when it might otherwise not be happy, if somebody's talking about having to take a rheumatoid arthritis injection and have to inject themselves and why it's so difficult, and you feel the pain that they're going through, in that moment, you have hope because you're listening to them and you're listening to that story in order to be able to give them a better solution. So it always ends up hopeful and it always ends up in a way that actually can help describe the variety and also solve for the gaps. So I think that's what has, at a very high level, to me, that's what qualitative research has always been fun. That's the fun of it, that I don't think I could ever leave it, so to speak.
For sure. I'm sure you've heard this. I'm going to make an assumption that you have heard something along the lines of, how can we go with just one or two people's data?
Oh, yeah.
What's the statistical significance of this? How can I make a decision on one little story? What do you say to that?
It happens all the time. So you can assume correctly it happens all the time. It's one of these moments. I don't know why we like to pin things against each other. That was a qual versus quant, right? It is not a qual versus quant. It's a qual and quant. They both have their roles. If I say I want to do qualitative analysis and qualitative inquiry, and I only do one or two people, well, you need to have a very clear rationale for why it's one or two people. Are you going contextually very deep? There are times you're visiting sites where it's just one or two sites, or it's 3 or 4 sites, but you're spending the whole day, and the depth of knowledge that you're getting will never be collected if you did a quantity. So in those moments when people start to go after it's just one or two pieces of data, the question is then, wait a minute, are you trying to get a quantitative output from this? Then yes, one or two is not enough. But what we're trying to do is describe the variety. And what you will find is, there's lots of people who've written about this, what you will find is that people will think about this concept of number, and then they'll realize, wait a minute, you don't really have to go after a large number of people. It could be 8 in a given bucket of how you describe your sample. And that's more than enough. You're going to get the depth that you need, and you're going to start hearing repeats. And what it does is you're trying to be able to describe an environment. Sometimes I look at deliverables and people will just say, transparency is important. Transparency is important when you are applying for a job. I'm just making that up. We're looking at evaluating how people apply for jobs to a particular company. How you describe transparency. What does transparency actually mean? You can't just say 8 out of 10 people said transparency is important, because what is the design team going to do with that? They're going to go, great, but I don't know what the attributes of transparency are to the population. I know as a designer what I think transparency means, but is that what they think? And that's what we're trying to do, is break down those elements of variety. Because once we get them, then we can go and throw it out to 500,000, whatever our sample size is for a quantitative analysis, and go for it and say, yeah, you know what? You'll find that this many people actually agree with that. But you need that variety and depth before you can start to question numbers. And it's not to say that we have to always do qualitative first. You can start with quantitative. You can ask what the problem is quantitatively, or even ask what the gaps in knowledge are quantitatively, and then going deep. But the two have to coexist. They cannot be pitted against each other, which that one thing still surprises me, but that is my way of addressing it. And often when people start to hear that there is a method and an approach to those two and why they should be actually brought together as a completely holistic circle, then they get it.
Yeah, I've seen so many times where the choice is one or the other. We're going to go with the quant. We're going to send out a survey. We're going to get numbers behind it so that we can move forward confidently.
The problem is, and I feel bad, honestly, because I know qualitative people are always talking about the fact that, oh, we're never given a chance, or we're not given space at the table. I feel equally sad for quantitative, because I feel a lot of times quantitative samples and output studies are misused. They're interpreted in some way or fashion or form that suit the story or suit the agenda that's going behind it. It's not as if one suffers less than the other, if that's fair to say. It's that they're both abused in favor of just pushing the deadline without really understanding. That's a very sore topic of late, for sure, for many people. But more and more organizations are becoming so deadline focused that they forget that there is a process to go through, and that process actually does yield good things if it's given a chance. But if we try to do 40 hours of work in 20 hours, or we have $10,000 worth of work and we want to do it in $2,000, you can't. We just have to be very honest about it. You can't. So what are you going to lose? But we never have this conversation of what you're going to lose. We simply just plow forward, literally like bulls in a china shop. And we don't explain, okay, sure, we can do 10,000 for 2,000, but we can't do the same amount of work and effort. Something has to come down. It's a discussion, I think, with qualitative researchers that we have to do better. I have a lot of thoughts around that, because I think the education of qualitative research has to be done better. People have to understand how it works and understand how to do a good job of it. And a lot of people think they just pick it up overnight and they start running with it. And I can do a study, it's no big deal. And it's not. So that's also put us back a few steps, if you ask me.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen people who are like, I've seen you do 1 million interviews. I can do one myself. And I'm like, well, good luck. Sometimes good researchers make it look easy.